Hey, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net. So, we're starting to ink Morning Star issue 7. And let me see if I can adjust the lighting here. So, what I have here on my board is page 1 of this issue. I still have a little bit of penciling to do on the issue, but it's really just finishing up the cover. And there's a couple of pages that I actually want to insert into the story. There's certain sequences that I feel like could use a little bit of extra, story development to them. So, but beyond that, I'm ready to get started inking. And I thought instead of trying to jump back and forth between pencils and inks in this video, I'll just sit down and get started. So, I see Syrup Studios popping in. He says, that page looks good. Thank you so much. Hopefully I will not butcher it. This page is going to be challenging for me because one of the things that I feel is important for artists to do is to challenge themselves to draw things that they are not good at. And I do not consider myself great at drawing environments, in terms of making them really feel like areas that characters can walk around in. So I've been putting in more environments, meaning establishing shots that aren't just a backdrop. I see Epic Trilogy popped into the chat. How's it going, man? Hey, thanks for dropping by. So, it's challenging here because, for instance, because this is a wider establishing shot, one of the things I'm trying to be wary of is having a lighter line weight, the actual thickness of the lines. Now, the challenge, the counterbalance to that is that because I'm going to do a lot of this page with a small brush, this right now I'm inking with a number 2, which is what I tend to use for the outline of all of the figures. But I'm actually using this as a much lighter than the outline that I would use for the rest of the page. Like normally, you'll see when I get down to these other panels, one of the things that I like to do is before I dive into the details, this is a thing I picked up from my buddy Carl Altstetter, comic creator and a good friend. One of the tips he gave me was drawing the holding lines for all of the figures, which is basically the silhouettes. And the idea is that if it reads strongly in silhouettes, if it reads well, people can see what's going on, and the page has a nice dynamic flow to it, then that's kind of half the battle. Because then you're sort of filling in darks and lights and adding detail from there. Now that's challenging when you're doing a page that's a wide shot, or at least it's challenging for me in the sense that I don't want the entire page to have the same line thickness, the same line weight throughout, because that will make everything feel kind of the same. But the way that perspective works, not perspective, but the way that detail works in terms of observation, the farther back you get, the less detail you see. So in theory, you're going to see less detail on all of the figures and all of the elements in this page because it's a wider shot, at least in this particular shot. So it's a challenge to kind of have to go through here and create sort of a balance between all of the major shapes of the environment without having everything feel the same. So, and in fact, I think that's one of the new challenges for me is doing holding lines with environments, because the way I tend to draw is I will usually do the whole background with a 00 brush, and that thinner brush will basically create the sense that even though it's not observationally correct, it would make all of the figures, which would have a thicker outline, stand out a little bit more. And now I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I do that with a page that's mostly environment? So I realized I gotta start doing holding lines with the environment. And I will tell you that doing this while I'm talking with you guys is actually challenging, because I really have to pay a little bit more attention than I normally do when I'm inking. For the most part, the inking phase for me is a reward. because I draw very loose layouts and loose pencils. A lot of the heavy lifting in terms of story development is happening in my thumbnails. That's when I'm really working out what the page is going to be, what the story is going to be. So when I get to inking, it's like I can usually just relax, put on a podcast or something, and let my mind go and relax. But there's so much going on in here, and this is a page, because it's a giant environment, this particular establishing shot could very easily get away from me. I can start noodling and putting in detail where it doesn't need to be, or where it's distracting, or leaving out important details. So normally this is a lot more relaxing, and I'm not saying that this is unpleasant. What I'm saying is it's more challenging, and I have to focus a little bit more than I usually do. So instead of Party City, this is sitting here doing work. And yeah, Gustavo Rodriguez asked, will this live be recorded? Yes, it will. So if you have other stuff to do, that's cool, I understand. The replays will always be live. And I do need to get better into the habit of scheduling these. I know I talked about it, that it was probably going to be a few more weeks. But I'm eventually going to just I think what I might do is just pick a time each week and say, this is when I think I'm going to do it next week. And we'll go week by week. So if I can at least say, all right, I'm committing to doing it, next week at like 3 o'clock or something, then I show up at that time. And then the following week, if I'm like, oh, wait, I have family stuff to do, or for whatever reason it wouldn't work, I could, then the following week I may change it at a different time. But I'm going to try at least scheduling it a week in advance. And then from there, hopefully I'll find a time that I can make consistent for showing up for these streams. But yeah, the stream's going to be recorded. It'll be available for replay as soon as I'm done. I know everyone's got busy schedules. I know there's a lot of things I like to watch when I see creators that I admire online. And I'm like, I would love to sit and watch this, but I don't have time. I got other stuff I got to do. So let's see here. So yeah, right now it really is just like basically drawing the silhouette of the entire background. Let's see, another question there. Anthony DP asks, do you like bleed panels for establishing shots? And I also see you just finished coloring another page. Yes, I do like doing bleed for establishing shots. And the reason for that is because I find this is not true of all storytelling devices, but when I do a panel that does not have a border, that goes either bleeds outside of just itself, or it goes all the way out past the edge of the page, what I feel like is that it changes the scale of time. In the sense that, for me, the way I imagine it, and this is something I kind of picked up from Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, and if you've never read that book and you're creating comics, go read that book. It is a absolute must for comic creators. But what I like in bleed panels is that you very much get the sense that this panel comes first, then this, and there's like a sequence of something happening, boom, 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 in a very short period of time. But when you have a panel that is broken out, that doesn't have a panel border, that bleeds, it gives you a sense that it is either a long moment, or it could be like a montage. It gives you a sense of it's a breath that's held for a moment that isn't necessarily constricted to one moment, then the next, then the next. It feels like a moment that can last and hang for, it could be an instant, it could be an eternity. So, kind of like, it's like photography, like it's an image that's caught in time, it's a captured moment. So I like doing that with both with establishing shots, and as well, if there's a dramatic moment that I really kind of want to let resonate and hang in the air. Like, I don't want the reader to necessarily push away from that moment right away. A lot of times I'll do that within story pages, within shots that aren't establishing shots. I'll insert a shot there that goes full bleed. And the other challenge I have when I'm doing backgrounds in environments like this is trying not to make the background feel so repetitive. That's something that I'm constantly fighting, is the natural order or the natural instinct of human beings to make things match up and feel like, make all of these spaces feel like they're the same size. I think it's something that I'm constantly struggling against. Basically just trying to make a page feel organic and lifelike and real. I can't remember the last time I mentioned it, but the comic creator Sean Murphy, on his DeviantArt account, which I don't know if he posts to regularly anymore, but he had a really great blog post about drawing environments and making them feel like spaces and environments that you could walk into and walk through, thinking about the three-dimensionality of space. And that really made a big impact on me because I wasn't doing it. I could see what he was saying. I could see how important that is to visual storytelling. And it was something that was a skill that I was like, wow, I really lack this particular comic book storytelling fundamental. And so since then, I've tried to put in panels that force me to do these things. Something that I feel it's a personal choice for me. I can't tell people, yes, you should do this, but I look at that because I'm self-publishing my own work, I'm not drawing just for the viewer, in the sense that there are things that I want to improve at, and instead of waiting until I have time to just do studies and doodle, I will draw things that I know I have not mastered. I'll put those things in my comics because I figure, while at the same time something for a viewer, I am also trying to expand my skills, and I will never have enough time to study all the things I want to study. And it's real easy to say, well, I'm going to avoid drawing these certain things because I want to make sure the comic looks good for the reader. And I do want my content to look good for the reader. But I also need to make time to improve and practice things that I'm not great at. So to a certain degree, there's definitely parts of my comics where I'm drawing things that I know aren't going to look as good as I want them to, because I'm putting in things that I need to practice. But I'm choosing to practice live in front of you guys as opposed to hiding away. One, because I'm never going to have any other time to do it. But two, I think it is important for other artists to see that you're not supposed to know everything. You know, very few people come out fully formed and doing professional quality work. I have a lot of growth to do as an artist, and I'm appreciative of people that say nice things about my work. I'm grateful to it. I don't think that I'm a bad artist, but I fully acknowledge that I'm still growing and learning. And I think that allowing that to happen and saying, all right, I'm gonna go and work at it, you have to do it whenever you have time. And if you have to choose, this is where I get to the point of saying this is a personal choice, not something that I'm saying you need to do this. The personal choice I've made is I would rather make mistakes in public than never try anything that I'm not good at because I don't have time to study these things outside of the time that I'm taking to do comic work. That's a personal choice. I can't say, oh, this is how you should do it. This is how comics are made. This is a personal thing. But, you know, I've had people watch me drawing over a number of years, or people that have picked up my early, see where you've grown here and there and different things that I've tried. And that means a lot to me because that's one of the things that I hope happens over time. I do find it frustrating that I don't have as much time to put out as many issues as I would like to per year, because just the act of putting out more work, I feel like that's a big thing that helps with growth, is just the act of producing work. So this might be one of those pages where I will come back and touch up in Photoshop and come in and maybe reduce the light of the background, like reduce the opacity of it, knock it back a little bit. It's funny, I'm actually sort of using a little bit of my my figure drawing touch. Whenever I take figure drawing classes, I'm constantly remember to build up the figure, like to make lines that are specific, intentional, but light, as opposed to drawing heavy-handed. And in this particular page, that light feel is so necessary to what I'm trying to do. And I feel like normally I would put a lot of texture in that background of the ground and I would have the texture get less and less as you go behind the this little deer that's standing out here. But I really want the deer to be kind of silhouetted in the page. So I'm choosing not to put texture on the ground only because it makes like a nice frame for the deer right there. That was really one of the hardest things, just in terms of laying out the composition of this page, is how to draw this whole environment and yet still frame this tiny figure, because I want it to feel very small and vulnerable. This little deer walking through the forest, coming out, getting a little bit of water. You know, I didn't really show you that closely what's going on in the page. So there's a deer, it's walking through the forest. It looks around a little bit, look left, look right, look left, leans down to get some water, and then while it's drinking, its eyes widen. There's a demon in the trees, and it sees the demon in the reflection. So the demon doesn't stand out that much in this particular page. But that's one of the things that I'm gonna try and work out in the ink. That's another one of these challenges, is that a lot of the times, these pencils, because I do rough layouts, I've been doing more indication of tone, and that's for two reasons. One is because of helping me work out more of the details, and the other part is because I publish sketchbooks of each issue before I actually get the inks done. So these sketchbooks, I want them to feel a little bit more finished, and because of that, I've been doing I tend to indicate more tone in the in my layouts than I would normally do. And that's actually something else I've been debating about in terms of the sketchbooks. I've been considering a webcomic model, switching to doing Morningstar and trying to get a page done a week. Normally what I do is I do all of my pencils, then I do all of my inks. And that's because I really do make a lot of adjustments as I go, and I like the idea of being able to mold and shape all of the pencils as a whole and then all of the inks as a whole. But I'm looking at different ideas for publishing models, and I think I'd mentioned before doing a Patreon. I thought that it might be more interesting for people if they could, because it takes me a while to get the books themselves complete as a whole, but I am always drawing and I'm always sharing what I'm drawing. I thought, maybe publishing a page at a time isn't necessarily a bad way to go. But what that would mean is also that these sketchbooks, the whole point of having the sketchbooks, having a whole thing for people to read, that's not anymore. Unless the whole publishing as a webcomic is me publishing the sketch version first, then publishing the ink version first, which feels a little weird to me. So I don't know. That's something that I'm still debating. I was pretty far along the lines of saying, yeah, I think I will start doing webcomics of Morningstar. I mean, for the last, it's only, this issue and then one more, but maybe running it online that way, and then just having the print issues for sale. But I hadn't thought about the fact that means that the sketchbooks don't make as much sense anymore. or maybe they still do. But part of the reason why I started doing the sketchbook was not just because of letting people get a look at my pencils or my rough layouts, but also part of it was simply I only am able to put out 1 or 2 issues a year, if I also have a sketchbook that comes out when at the halfway point when I've got all the pencils done, that's at least one more thing that I'm publishing each year. So I don't know. Still thinking about it. Let's see here. You know what? Let me adjust the camera a little bit. I'm gonna bring it a little bit closer to the board, so hopefully you can see a little bit more of the detail as I'm working here. Let's bring this down a little bit more. And then as I go, let's see. Just want to make sure it's not down so low that it's uncomfortable for me and it's right in my lap. There we go. I don't know. You guys can tell me whether that makes much of a difference to you or not. Also, I keep a roll of paper towels under my drawing table in case I have any inks or spills, but I also use it to sort of wipe my brushes off, and I realize the paper towel that I've got there now is covered with shavings from penciling. Gotta switch that out. All right. Let us continue. All right. Inking requires a lot of patience. I definitely feel like there is a point when I will get facile enough. I'll have enough skill with it that I can just sort of rip through and flat through pages. But as it stands right now, I tend to be a little bit, I try to be thoughtful about it. Like, is each line I'm putting down really necessary? And that's mainly because in my drawings, I'm a noodler. And one of the things I would actually like to do is compare the noodling process versus the polished process. One of the things I've also been thinking about, and I know, like, yeah, the last thing I need is to add another project to my workload, but I liked the idea of having 2 comic books going concurrently. Yeah, I'm not doing that now, but I've considered the idea of having 2 different comic projects going on and have one project be thoughtful and careful and deliberate, putting in all of the work that with the carefulness and the caution that you're seeing here, and then having another comic book that's almost like just rough scribbles just dashed off, and really just to see how the difference in the storytelling, see how much of a difference or whether there really is a difference between the stuff that I'm trying very hard to execute at a high level versus work that I'm operating on pure instinct. I'm not really fixing mistakes. I'm just painting and just letting the thing fly. I mean, I'm curious because obviously if people didn't feel like there was much of a difference between work that I labored over versus work that I just sort of, I don't want to say crapped out, but versus work where I'm not obsessing over the craft, then that would probably lead me towards doing even looser work. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing because I'm already a pretty loose artist. And I feel like a lot of the gains that I have made in terms of craft have come from me taking the time to polish and make things like if I sit down and I really tighten up my work, that's still pretty loose in comparison to most artists. Like I'd say most illustrators have very, very tight work, whereas I'm probably a little bit more scribbly and scratchy. So that whatever tightness you see in my work here is me actively trying to do that. It's not how I instinctually draw. So yeah, I also think about that, and I wish that I could find the time, like even if I just had like an hour a day, because right now I only usually get like an hour a day to work on Morningstar, but if I had like an extra hour a day just to do loose, rough, like just almost even making up the story as I go, but the main focus being just drawing a comic from my gut. I would love to see how that comes out. So I think that's one of the things, once I get that Patreon up and running, like that may be one of the eventual goals. Hey, I see American Swordfish popped into the chat. How you doing, man? Hope you're having a good weekend. Yeah, when I eventually get that Patreon up and running, that is one of the goals I think I would like to put in there, is at some point to start a second comic book series. And I think that, I mean, again, Morningstar is going to end. There's only 2 issues left. But what I'm considering is whatever series I do after that, and I already kind of know which one I'm going to do after that, but to maybe consider if I get enough subscribers on Patreon to have 2 series going, and then have one be the more polished, detailed thing, and then have the other one be just rough and loose and raw. So, you know, just stuff I think about. I find myself already getting sucked into the desire to do all of the detail that's in here. But, and you know what? It is tempting, but I feel like it's worth showing you how I generally work, which is going through and doing holding line for the whole page. So I think I'm going to run through and do the rest of that down to the bottom. Just need to work on the lower border of the trees here. Let's see here. Epic Trilogy commented, if you do the webcomic, you can get an issue done, pencils, inks, and color, scan each page, and then publish each stage per page daily, and have the comic for sale while the webcomic catches up. That's a great point. All right. Yeah, it's another thing to consider. I think the reason why I debate over that is only because I know that once I start putting it up, if I go this webcomic route, I'm going to want to stick to whatever I start with up front. Like if I decide that it's going to be all of the process pages is in order, I may start doing that and then decide I don't like it, but because I've already published in that order, like started publishing it in that manner, that I'm going to feel real hesitant to want to change it, and I'm going to feel kind of locked in. But, you know, I shouldn't be scared of that. I always talk about just trying stuff and seeing what happens. So if I tell that to other people, you know, what's good for the goose, good for the gander. So maybe I shouldn't be so afraid of just trying shit and just seeing how it works out. This brush is starting to get a little bit older, and it's giving me sort of split hairs. It's giving me a double line instead of a single line, depending on how I hit it. And the thing about it is that normally that is an effect that you're fighting against, like when your brush is fraying, but it can give you a really nice look if you can learn how to control it, you know. If you can force the brush to give you a single line where you need it on sides that are facing the light, and then get that double line when you have forms that are turning away from the light, you can kind of use it as an additional tonal effect, kind of like help you with the lighting. Okay. Yeah, it's funny, and there's times when I'm looking at my layouts and I'm just trying to figure out what my intent was, because it was so long since I drew it. And when I intent, I'm specifically talking about the coastline and where I wanted the division for the reflection of the water to begin. This line is darker than it should have been. I really should have gone lighter along this top edge. That is one of the tricky things. Like, you can relax when you're inking. It's an enjoyable, fun process for me. But if I let go for 1 second and stop paying attention, I'll put it on a line and be like, oh, no, I don't like that. And I mean, I can just go in and white that out. But because there's going to be rushing lines, there's going to be a lot of speed lines. It's going to be like it's a river, you know, the deer is going down to drink from. I feel like that's going to counterbalance the thickness of that particular line. There's some things where I will make mistakes, and the first question I ask myself is like, well, how big of a mistake is it? Like, is it something that I feel like is going to really distract the reader? If that's the case, then it's something that I fix. Sometimes I will make mistakes and I'll say, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have put that line there. And then I just move on. I'm just like, well, it doesn't look like what I wanted it to look like, but I can accept its existence, and I don't feel. That's what it really comes down to. I ask myself, is this going to distract the reader? And if the answer is no, then I usually leave it. And then the other question is it going to distract me? Because there's some things that I know aren't that big a deal, but they drive me crazy. And those are the things that I go back and fix. So, let's see. American Swordfish mentions in the chat, I'm studying composition and world building. Don't know anything yet, but I can tell it's very hard. Yeah, it's hard, but it's also enjoyable. The thing about it is that, excuse me for a second, I think I'm gonna sneeze. All right, it's probably gonna come out later when I'm in the middle of a sentence. The thing about world building is that it can be tedious, but it can also be soothing, because world building is just sort of piece by piece building, you know, it's literally what it is. You know, the environments, the vehicles, the clothing, the look and feel of the world. A lot of it can take place in terms of written documents. Not all of it is a visual thing, but hang on, I'm taking a sip of water, please. But the thing about world building is that it can be fun. Like, when I was a kid, I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. And a lot of the fun of an early campaign was, if you were gonna have a new character, was actually doing the rolls to decide all of your character's attributes and buying equipment and getting the character all set up. And in a way, world building feels a lot like that to me, where you're just picking out all of the details and trying stuff out. Like, for me, I do thumbnails for every issue, and world building feels like thumbnailing, working out all the different things that you're going to have in it. And just so you know, as I keep talking about world building, as I'm moving on now, I'm going to go in, and this is basically for me working out the major silhouettes of this establishing shot. Before coming back and filling in all of the details and then the actual tones, I'm going to go in and add the holding lines, the silhouettes for all of the figures in the rest of the page. Comment in the chat, Epic Trilogy mentioned that Frank Herbert did 6 years of research before writing Dune. I've only read the first, I can't remember if I read the first 2 Dune novels or the first 3. I read the first 2, you know what, I read the first 3 because I enjoyed Dune and Children of Dune. And then there was one more book that I read, and by the time I got to the third book, it was caring about the world. Like, it felt so removed from what I enjoyed. Now, that said, the first book, the original Dune, is one of the best books I've ever read. And in fact, I've only read it the one time because I've seen the movie multiple times. I own the David Lynch movie, and I have not watched the version they had on Sci-Fi, and people have told me it's good. I should make time to go back and watch it. It's a great series. So, I'm not saying I don't. For people that do enjoy the Dune series as a whole, I'm not. I don't mean to offend. I loved the first book, and then just very much lost interest in the rest of the series as I went. But yeah, I actually am interested in hearing about the world building that went into making Dune. So I may go and do a little research on that on my own later on. But yeah, world building is as unpleasant or as pleasant as you make it. If you're somebody who actually enjoys research and reading and learning about things and doodling and sketching, it's doodling with a purpose. Because when it comes to the writing part of world building, it's sketching with words. You're just sitting there and saying, all right, well, writing down, what about this type of religion that these characters have? What are the major religions? What are the different types of environments they live in? What kind of clothing would somebody who live in that environment need? And it's a matter of combining creativity with logic. I want to come up with whatever is the thing that feels magical to you in your world. That's fun, that's interesting, that makes it unique and special. And then you want to say, all right, if this is the setting, whether it's a city you're designing or a race of people, what type of things would those people have? What type of city would people who live in this have? Would they live in caves? Would they live in hills? Would they rely on technology? Are they people who would have, their whole societies run on magic? Would they actually build, like, if they're an ocean-faring creature, would they find a way to harness water and build hydroelectric dams? That's an interesting idea of combining basic early Earth technology in a fantasy setting. I mean, there's a whole lot of different ways to look at that. And, or the idea of, like, that's something I'd like to see, is how a tribal culture or an indigenous culture would work in a science fiction, like a Blade Runner environment. That's an interesting idea. Hell, you may see that pop up in one of my comics. And I'm sure it's not like me saying it right here is like, oh, a great breakthrough. I'm sure that there's probably books out there that have a lot of those effects, have a lot of those explore those themes and topics. Like, I feel like from when I was a kid, I remember also playing Shadowrun. And Shadowrun had a healthy mix of science fiction and fantasy. And there were a lot of different tribes that, that used both. So, ideas that are worth exploring. But yeah, world building is challenging. You know what? The big challenge for me is that you end up creating a lot of things and you don't know what you are and aren't going to use. I think that that's because you get the research part for me is fun. I enjoy that, and you keep generating a lot of ideas. But in the end, it's challenging to figure out. You don't want to limit yourself in terms of what types of ideas you explore and research and read about, because you never know what will be useful. But at the same time, you end up spending a lot of time reading about things and writing down ideas that may never make it into your book because, as you start writing it and detailing it, there's stuff that gets cut, or you need to add new details, and it turns out there isn't necessarily as much room as you thought to explore some of these ideas. Of course, that's also how a lot of authors end up with spin-off series, or they come up with an idea that they really love, but they don't have room for it in book one. But they're like, well, I'm going to write a trilogy, so maybe I will be able to explore this city or this culture or this aspect of the world that I have built in book two or book three. So, yeah, it's not necessarily that world building is hard. It's more that it's time consuming. That's actually the best way to look at it, because tedious makes it sound unpleasant. Hard makes it sound like, oh, well, this is something you really have to, work your ass off to perfect. And it's the crafting of the stories which you have to work your ass off to perfect. The world building it's research. It's research and writing it down and combining your research with your creativity, which in my mind is fun, but it takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of time because you can't tell the future. You don't know what you are and aren't going to need until you're almost done. Let's see. Ion Rocks popped in and said, I have never read this series, but I loved the movie. Blasphemous, I know. Talking about Dune. Yeah, you know what, though? I'm right there with you. I loved that David Lynch movie, and a lot of people that are David Lynch fans hate that movie. And it is the least Lynchian of Lynch films. But I think it was because I saw Dune many, many years before I saw Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, I only saw Lawrence of Arabia probably within the past 4 or 5 years. I've been making it a point to go and watch movies that I, as a creative person, felt like I should see. And once you see Lawrence of Arabia, you're like, okay, yeah, they just, it's not like Dune was blatantly ripped from Lawrence of Arabia. I don't know what the timeline was between Lawrence of Arabia coming out and Dune being written, and plus also the actual the fact that it's based on a real person. Frank Herbert, for all I know, and again, this is part of the research, so it's worth me looking it up. It could have been based on the person from Lawrence of Arabia and have nothing to do with the movie, or it may not have any correlation at all. But that said, when I saw that movie, I loved it, and then having seen Lawrence of Arabia as an adult, I can see a lot of parallels and similarities. So that might be an interesting thing. For those of you who have not seen Lawrence of Arabia, but you have seen Dune, you should definitely go check that out. It's a very interesting historical film. It's very beautiful, visually epic, and you can see a lot of the, taking place in the desert, and also, Lawrence allying himself with tribal indigenous people to fight against oppressors. You can see a lot of the themes that are in Dune playing out in this movie that came earlier. But, that's true of a lot of stories where if you look back far enough, you can see that a lot of the things that we watch in film or TV today have been done before. They've been done in different ways, in different environments. And it's not necessarily that someone's ripping someone else off. It's more of the fact that it's recurring themes. Human beings have changed a lot throughout the years, but we were also the same in a lot of ways. And so when you see recurring themes, it's our past. I won't want to say continuing to haunt us, but it's us continuing to experience a lot of the same ideas and themes over and over again throughout the generations. History has a way of repeating itself. I need to focus a little bit. I can feel this silhouette starting to get away from me. Sometimes that's the interesting thing. For as much as I try to analyze and be logical about what I'm doing, there's also ways in which, as I draw, that I can just feel. And I'm like, I'll draw something that may have the actual anatomy and lighting that I want in a page, but I'll just look and be like, but it doesn't feel right. And that feel oddly enough, that feel is probably the most elusive thing. I mean, there's lots of artists that can draw sort of loose, cartoony, but it has that energy. And energy is actually the thing that you're seeking. So when I mentioned earlier about the idea of doing an experimental comic where I'm not even really worried about all of the anatomical or construction drawing, or worrying about making things look right, and just purely focusing on the energy and the feel of the page, that's kind of what I would be going for. It's just seeing, can I make each page feel like something? Can I get some energy in there that's going to resonate with people reading it? Let's see. Epic Trilogy mentioned that the classic hero's journey, and I presume that you're talking about Lawrence of Arabia. Although I think that it applies to Dune as well. It could apply to either story. Again, I mean, I just mentioned how there's similarities between the two. So as I'm going along here, you can see the idea that I'm going for with with each panel is that I go through and I draw the silhouette first. Because if you read the page as a silhouette and you can kind of figure out what the action is, if you can understand that, then the page is yours to screw up from there. The first goal for me is just trying to get the silhouettes to read well. And one of the challenges that I have is that a lot of times when I'm doing my inking, like I didn't perfectly follow the line that I put down as the division between the water and the shore. And a lot of times I'm really loose about this, but sometimes I get the lines just right in the in my layouts, and if I'm not paying attention, I screw up something that was actually working really well. So there's a whole sequence in the opening of this issue where these demons are chasing a deer. They're hungry, they're starving, and they see this deer out in the woods drinking. And this continues to be a challenge for me because while I feel like I did a decent job in the pages, as you'll see over the weeks, but I don't think I draw deer that well. One of the things I didn't want to let the fact that I wasn't great at drawing animals stop me from doing a Western. So I thought, well, this is a chance to practice horses. One of the things that I want to start doing is putting animals in every book that I do, so that I'm always forced to continue working on them. Like, I honestly thought I'd be better at drawing horses than I've gotten by the time I've finished the series. So maybe I need to do another Western just so I can work on more horses. Or maybe do something with like knights and something that's more fantasy related where it's got people on horseback. But point being is that I've put in work on improving at drawing horses, but I still have a ways to go. I don't feel like I draw them as well as I'd like. And there was something interesting that I noticed in the process. I think it was the last time I went to the zoo and actually studied animals. Like, there's some friends of mine that used to go as a sketch group occasionally to the Los Angeles Zoo. But that energy that I was talking about earlier, about capturing the feel of something. Well, when you're drawing human beings, you start with your gesture, and then you do your volumes, your primitive shapes, your boxes, your cylinders, your cubes, your spheres, and you sort of build the figure out of those, and then you add your anatomy. Now, the gesture really is, for me, the hardest thing to get is to really make something that feels alive, because a lot of bad drawing can be forgiven if you get the feel of the figure down. And I realized that animals, while they have anatomy, they're all gesture. Like if you just look at animals, they're so not conscious of humans. They're just sort of, they're doing whatever they're doing. They're not posing for us per se. They're just sort of relaxed and they're raw emotion. When you look at animals in nature, they are the thing that we're trying to capture when we're drawing gesture, when we're drawing, whether it's humans, animals, whatever figure work we're doing. Animals are like, their natural state is just their pure movement, like a dancer. And that's why dancers a lot of times get compared to, like, be having a body where they move like a panther, and just all those things. Those are instincts that just live in animals. And I realized, wow, that's one of the reasons why I should really spend a lot more time just drawing animals, is because they have, if you can capture that in them, then it makes it much easier to project that onto humans. So I might be due for another trip to the zoo. Although something else I found that one time the group of artists I hang out with, we went to the Natural History Museum instead. And the thing about the Natural History Museum is that it's all a lot of taxidermied animals preserved for the museum. They do not have that lifelike energy that you would hope to capture in a drawing, but what they do have is stillness. You can really study the anatomy of an animal because they're not moving. And that's the challenge when you're drawing animals at a zoo or a petting zoo or whatever natural environment where you're drawing living animals, is that they're always moving, and therefore it's hard. You start a sketch and then they move around. You start like fleshing out another one, they've already moved again, and they're always moving because they're pure movement. That's what they should be. But it does make it difficult to study them. And whereas you lose that movement at a natural history museum, I learned so much by just being able to sit there and try drawing the animal like a couple of times, trying to break down different anatomical forms, and then being able to move to another angle and draw that animal from a different side, or being able to draw exhibits where they've got the skeletons of certain animals. So you can, even with that, get into the deep anatomy, because you need both. You need the anatomy. So it's a nice counterbalance to be able to study both things in nature. At this point, I am drawing in more detail than I probably should. But because this creature is going to get its demon hiding up in the trees, he's going to get a little bit lost in the water. I want to define him a little bit more before I go back up to the top panel and start adding in details. All right. So at this point, I've kind of blocked in all of the major silhouettes. Clean the drafting board a little bit. I've been doing a lot of erasing lately, so A lot of that stuff is stuck in the page. So now the challenge is working through this page and just filling it all in without letting it turn to mush. I think I'm going to switch to a larger brush. I'm going to do in the broad shapes first, the larger areas of dark and light, and then come back in and do the detail with the smaller brush. And this is a approach that I have gone back and forth on. There's times when I like it, there's times when I don't. And I think the challenge I have here for me is to not just fill it in solid black, but actually leaving enough texture in there and trying to manipulate the texture so that it indicates structure. Not just the structure of the object, but it actually indicates, well, leaving texture in there to indicate texture. Like, are these rounded leaves versus just putting in dark, jagged slashes? It's a more subtle thing. Although even already at this stage, I am tempted to go with a smaller brush and add the wood text, the texture to the trees. I just feel like it'll read a little bit better. Fortunately, I got far enough down on the page. I was doing the silhouettes, the holding lines, and the rest of the page, that I'm not particularly worried about smearing the ink underneath. Like, it's had enough time to dry. You know, generally I don't work super wet, so the page has time to dry quickly. And when I have been in a scenario where a page is still a little bit wet and I'm worried about it, then I'll just break out a different page. Just go work on something else. Give this a chance to dry. Right now, it's working okay. You know what? While I'm on this side of the page, I should probably white out this line. I don't know why this printed. It was the border to this panel. Like, it was supposed to bleed all the way off the page, and for some reason, I guess when I set up my panels in Illustrator, I didn't put that one out far enough. Fact of the matter is that the way they have my page set up, it's probably gonna crop somewhere near here, and I'm probably not even gonna, this will even show up even outside of the bleed. But I like to have that extra space there in case, for whatever reason, when I'm actually setting up my pages for print, I need a little extra wiggle room. And I want it to go all the way to the edge to go full bleed. So at the time that I printed the page, I noticed that line there, and I thought to myself, And I hadn't decided whether I really wanted to reprint the page or just white it out. And I think, considering the fact that it's the edge of the page, whatever lines I paint on there should be fine. So I'm just gonna get a piece of scrap paper to get my whiteout going. There we go. Yeah, I know I'm cutting through that silhouette, but not a big deal. I'm gonna come back on this side of the page, fill all that in anyway. There. Voila. All right. So let's see if I go in here with a small brush now. Now see, this is the place where I could really easily just get lost, flipping back and forth between different brushes, putting in different levels of detail. And I remember when I was in high school, I had an art teacher, and I was working on a piece, and I rotated the board so I could draw with the natural curve of my hand. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm moving it around so I can get a better angle." And she said, "Well, you have to learn how to draw from whatever angle you're at. Because what are you going to do if you're working on a painting? You can't just up and rotate. If you're working on a big painting, you can't just up and rotate the canvas." And I remember a few years later, when I was in college, I was taking animation classes, and they had the large tables with the animation discs that are set into the table, and they rotate on pegs so that you can rotate your animation paper to use the natural curve of your drawing and draw whatever you want. And I remember thinking about that and being so pissed, and I wanted to go back and tell my high school teacher, it's like, yes, professional artists do rotate their pages to draw at whatever angle they want to draw at. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so hesitant to tell people this is how things should be done. I always like to tell people this is how I do them and this is why I do them. But, to just simply tell somebody, no, this is not how art is made, I just feel like it shuts a lot of doors. I do believe in learning the fundamentals before you break them, but that's different than simply just telling someone, no, you can't do it this way, no, you can't do it that way. I mean, I'm always of the mindset of like, try it, see what happens. It's not what I would do, and this is how other artists have approached this problem. And that's where research comes in handy. We're actually taking the time to look and study the old masters, study other illustrators, and look at their creative processes. But yeah, it's moving the page around. It just makes it easier to get a nice arc on whatever form or figure you're drawing. I suppose even if I were working on a large painting, I would still be like, if I need to rotate it, then I'll rotate it. I suppose if it was a big painting, it might be a pain in the ass depending on how much the area you needed to change or draw or work on, depending on how large that area is. Maybe you'd be like, it's not worth it to rotate the entire canvas. But particularly in drawing, I mean, I could see benefit to having enough control over your drawing tools that you can make any line you want from any angle you want. There's benefit to it. It increases your skill, increases it removes barriers. You literally can just work from, your way around any particular problem. But that said, I prefer just turn on a page. We're already at 65 minutes, and I was planning to only go for an hour. So I see Golgo said in the chat, I love line art like this. Well, thank you, Golgo. I really appreciate that. Appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me while I'm drawing. You know, one of the things that I'm planning for this mythical Patreon that will someday appear is to also make my finished pages available as for coloring for people that want to just practice working on coloring comic sequential pages. It's making some of my work available. You know, so you can just download the finished piece and color it. I am probably going to be on for just about 5 more minutes or so. Work on this panel a little bit more. If you guys have any other questions, now's the time to ask. And if not, then I will pop off for this week and continue getting some work done. You know, until my Patreon is set up, I do have a news that exists. It's a newsletter.jeremy.net. Jeremy.net is my website. If you go to newsletter.jeremy.net, it'll have a sign-up page. And basically, what it is it collects my my blog into an RSS feed, and it sends it out as a weekly newsletter. So that way you can get updates. You can see all my sketches, work in progress. And if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. You know, I'm happy to have you here, and hopefully you will come back and watch more videos. I try to get a video up every week. This is really pleasant, just sitting here and just drawing trees. It's another thing. I have only done a little bit of plein air drawing and painting. I've never really sat down and studied it. And that, much like animals, is something that I can see how much, the little that I've done has shown me will to do it. I mean, that's honestly the hardest part for me. It's not that, oh, I'm afraid to try this or I don't want to learn that. It's just having the time in your schedule. Because I could just study, I can just study every different aspect of drawing craft all day long. The school I went to for art school was a fine art program that's geared more towards art galleries, but it wasn't really geared towards illustration per se. And I realize now, all of the different aspects of illustration and perspective, volume, composition, all of these things that I have continued to study, you know, to this day. I really wish I had had the opportunity to have classes that focused on those elements. I mean, that said, it was still a really good program. I still learned a lot. Got my first art job out of that program while I was still in school. So, but yeah, studying these fundamentals for me is not boring. I love this. One of the things I'm also thinking about doing is just starting a series where I pick an art book, let's say Figure Drawing for All It's Worth or a Bridgman book, and I just do an ongoing series where I just study them. I just break down the books and go page by page and just share that. Share me learn, almost like I'm not teaching you. It's almost like I'd be your study guide or your study buddy while I'm showing you, well, this is what I'm learning and what I'm getting out of it. Maybe that's what study group. Look at me making all these plans for a campaign that hasn't even been started yet. You know, I do my live streams off of my phone because it's easier to just plug it in and mount it above my drawing board and go. But I realize that that's one of the advantages of having the advantage of doing it through your computer is that you can run use one of those programs the encoder so I could actually have all of my social media links along the bottom while I'm going. So it's something for me to consider, something for me to look into. I will look into that. But for now, I'm gonna call it an evening. Thank you everybody that stopped by, had some comments in the chat. Really appreciate it. Like I said, hit that subscribe button, newsletter, and go be creative.